Many minds have contributed to the evolution of counseling and psychotherapy. In the quest for the understanding and resolution of inner conflict, philosophies and approaches were born. Traditionally, counselors have embraced one model of therapy to the exclusion of others. Today, they draw from several approaches, integrating these in a manner suitable to their own style and the needs of their clients. This is the art of integrative counseling. In this program, you will see segments from 13 counseling sessions recorded several years earlier in Idlewild, California. Each session will have a different emphasis and be introduced with brief lecturettes by psychologist, author, and educator Dr. Gerald Corey. For some of the topics, other clinicians will share their own perspectives as well. Ideally, this video should be used in conjunction with Dr. Corey's texts, The Art of Integrative Counseling, and Case Approach to Counseling and Psychotherapy, both of which describe the case of Ruth. Topics will include the beginning of counseling, the therapeutic relationship, establishing therapeutic goals, understanding and dealing with diversity, understanding and dealing with resistance, cognitive focus in counseling, emotive focus in counseling, behavioral focus in counseling, an integrative perspective, working with transference and countertransference, understanding how the past influences the present, working toward decisions and behavior change, and evaluation and termination.
There are four general categories of theories, if we want to reduce it. One is the psychodynamic approach, and that's sort of the foundation. The second is the relationship-oriented approach, or the experiential approaches. Third category would be the cognitive behavioral, sometimes called the action therapies, that stress how we think and what we're doing. And a fourth category would be called the systemic approaches, such as family therapy or feminist therapy, that focus more on outside of the individual as it impacts the individual. You know, there are both advantages and disadvantages of an integrative approach. Some will say, well, it's best to have one theory so you have consistency and that you can have a set of some discipline, that if you are open to too many theories and you try to combine too many approaches, that you wind up not having any consistent framework. On the other hand, I don't think any theory holds all the truth, or that any theory has the one right way to work with all clients. So I think an advantage of an integrative approach is it's something you can ongoingly build and create, and it fits for who you happen to be. Also, I think it's very important to be open to your client and attempt to figure out what does this client need. And I think that is an advantage to having an integrative approach. But one of the things I'll want to demonstrate and talk about is I think if we don't pay attention to a client's thinking and how they're feeling and what they're doing in their lives, I think really we're not going to accomplish much. Our therapy, I think, will be fairly superficial.
In this program, you will see an unrehearsed simulated process of therapy with a client named Ruth, with commentaries by Dr. Corey following the sessions. Ruth is a 39-year-old married woman with 4 teenagers coming to therapy for the first time with some anxiety and a host of somatic complaints.
I guess I've become aware recently that I pretty much live for others so far. It's like I've been this superwoman who gives and gives until I'm empty, and then there's no more left to give. I've tried to be the good wife and the good mother that my family expects me to be, or maybe that I expect myself to be. I don't like who I am. I don't like my looks. I don't like my body. My family nagged me as a child about all kinds of things. I was always worried about who they wanted me to be. I do look forward to becoming an elementary school teacher, but I get so overwhelmed. I don't know if I'll ever get there. I try to do the right things, and I think I'm a good person. I go to church every Sunday, but I still feel guilty for leaving my father's church. My parents haven't really disowned me, but sometimes it feels like they have. I'm pretty nervous about going to see a counselor. I don't know what to expect. I just hope the counselor will tell me what to do so I can go do it. Maybe then things will get better.
Of all the sessions, the first is probably the most important, because I think your client in some way is sizing you up and saying, is it safe for me to be in here? And there are so many things to accomplish. One is, I want to hear the client. What's your story? Why are you coming here? What are you wanting? How do you think I can be helpful to you? I also want to do some teaching or education during that first session in terms of how you as a client can get the most from this process. And certainly, I have to do some informing about basic rules like confidentiality. I can't tell you that everything you say will be held in confidentiality. I need to talk about the limits. I think informed consent is the foundation of a counseling session. Informed consent is basically giving the client enough information that they can make an informed choice about, do I want to be a client at this time with this particular therapist? There are some basic concepts from person-centered therapy and existential approach that I think are very useful for beginning a counseling session. In person-centered therapy, I think the emphasis is on how can I really grasp the world of the client sitting before me. So what's important is not that I have my own agenda and that I'm trying to superimpose that agenda on the client, but that I'm listening to you and finding out how can I facilitate your own process. The existential approach helps me not get so worried about technique, but much more on how can I establish a basic sense of trust. How can I be open to what this person is saying? And lastly, I think the feminist approach helps in the beginning, because what we're doing here is saying the client is basically an expert on his or her life. And how can I, with my own expertise, help you resolve your own problems that you're bringing to therapy?
Dr. Corey and Ruth now begin the process of therapy.
Maybe you can say a bit about what actually prompted you to make that call.
Oh, you mean to call you?
Yeah, at this point in your life.
Well, a couple weeks ago I went to the doctor, and I was having some trouble with my neck and my shoulders, and my heart was racing. And I went to see him, and after the exam he told me that there was nothing physically wrong, but that I needed to call a counselor.
Was that reassuring, that he told you there was nothing physically wrong?
Well, I was glad to know that there was nothing wrong with my heart, because I was really worried about that. But now I don't really know what it is. And
For Dr. Corey, letting Ruth talk about what it's like to come in for therapy is his first priority.
it makes me kind of nervous, because I don't know if I change a lot, like what it'll be like at home then. You know, like maybe with my husband it'd be different. Maybe with my kids it would be different. So I just wonder if I change a lot here, you know, how they'll feel about me changing. I'm not sure if they're going to like it.
I suppose that's a risk of this kind of work, that you may change. I hope you would, but you decide the changes you want to make. And maybe everybody in your life won't be comfortable with that. If that's a concern of yours, we could do some work with that too.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to do today, among several, is give you an opportunity to kind of find out how we're going to work together. And I'd like to find out a bit more about maybe your own expectations, what you're hoping for.
Eliciting Ruth's expectations, hopes, fears, and ambivalent feelings is essential in this first session.
Well, I thought maybe that you would just ask me questions and that I would answer them. And then you would just tell me how to change whatever it was that I was worried about. That was the main thing that I wanted you to do.
Let's say I had a magic wand and I can wave it, and all of a sudden your sleep disorder would be cured. You wouldn't have a racing heart. You wouldn't have all the symptoms you just talked about. how do you think your life would be any different?
Well, I'm not sure. I guess I would just feel a little bit more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't worry so much about what's wrong with me all the time.
What are the things that are going on in you that you'd like to understand more?
Well, I kind of about the last couple years I've been, I'm getting close to my 40th birthday, and I've been feeling...
Allowing Ruth an opportunity to tell her story is important. Later in the session, Dr. Corey will explain to her how therapy works.
The thing I'm hoping we can do today is talk a little bit about how we'll be working together and what we'll be doing in here, because I think the more you can learn about this process, the more you can take initiative and use it. And what I hope you do is talk about something that's difficult, not easy stuff, because I assume that my job is to help you with things that are harder to talk about.
Mm. So I should decide what to talk about before I come?
Well, at least give it some thought. Mm. And I see my job as more to kind of support you, to challenge you, to certainly be present during the session and listen and let you know what it's like to hear what you're saying. But my job isn't to somehow make decisions for you. This is a learning situation, and if you want to really make the best use of it, I think you're going to have to do something at home. And one thing I'd like you to do is keep a journal and write down your thoughts and your feelings, and we'll talk more about that, and that's in the handout I'm going to give you.
In closing, Dr. Corey and Ruth briefly process their first session together.
I'd like to know how it's been to have the first hour together here. How has it been for you?
Well, it was very different than what I expected.
Aha. Tell me a little more about that.
Well, I thought that you would just ask me a lot of questions, and I would just tell you the answers. And so it went differently. It was a little bit more comfortable than I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm. I'm very open at any point for you to ask questions about what we do. I don't want to have any mystery in this. I think the more you know about the process and about what we're doing, the more you'll be able to use this.
Okay.
If I had to draw from any one particular approach in the beginning, it would be the person-centered approach, which stresses understanding her world as she's experiencing it. So as much as possible, I didn't want to have any preconceived notions or ideas about how we would end up, but I did want to give her a chance to talk about her fears, her expectations, and what it was like in this moment of being together. So the material I got was largely from her and what she was thinking and feeling and doing in that moment. If I had one main thing I wanted to accomplish, it was setting the stage for what we'd be doing later. I'd want her at least to begin to think about what her work would be in this and what my work would be. And so giving her that package of materials to read and take home, and the assignment or two will prep her, I think, for next session. The therapeutic relationship is the core of any kind of therapy. But there are some therapies or theoretical orientations that primarily stress the relationship. Example of that would be person-centered approach, the existential approach, and the Gestalt approach. They all have in common that the quality of the relationship between the counselor and the client is the all-important variable, and techniques are secondary importance. If you don't have that relationship, your techniques won't take root. So even behavior therapists, I think, would say you need a good working relationship. You need rapport. You need a sense of basic trust. So all therapies, I think, attend to the relationship. And if we don't, I don't think the techniques will be much use. I think sometimes students get very worried about the techniques they will use. And while I think there's a place for learning skills and techniques, certainly, I think that what's really important is your ability to be present with a client and to be open to what you're hearing and allow yourself to be affected.
In their next session, Dr. Corey works on establishing a therapeutic relationship.
So one thing I'd like to find out too is, did you have any afterthoughts, Ruth, about the session last week?
It seemed so different for me. I wondered whether it was being selfish.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an answer for that? Was it being selfish?
It seems that that would be the response of some of the people in my life, my husband maybe. I'm not used to having somebody really ask me so many questions about myself and be so interested. It feels kind of awkward, like I'm the subject of all of this, and I'm not used to having somebody pay so close attention to what I'm thinking and what I want.
In this session, Dr. Corey and Ruth continue to explore and clarify their roles in establishing a working relationship.
I was hoping that you be telling me more what to do, and you be making more of the decisions.
Right. And you know, I think even if I had enough wisdom, which I don't, to tell you what to do, I'll tell you why I wouldn't want to do that. Because you'd have to keep coming forever then. Because anytime you'd get a new problem, you'd have to come back and say, well, where am I going to go next? So, although I can appreciate you maybe wanting that, it'd be easier in a way. I really don't want to give in too easily to tell you what you should do. It sounds like that's what you've heard a lot in your life already.
I just, you know, besides my husband, I really don't talk that much to other men. Mm-hmm. And so it's new to talk to somebody that's a man and somebody that's a stranger. I really don't know you. And
so I'm a strange man. Huh?
No. In a way.
Mm-hmm.
The therapeutic relationship is one of the most significant factors in the change process. Developing trust as the foundation will take some time.
It sounds like you're cautious with me. In some way you're measuring what you're going to say, and you're very aware of what I might be thinking and how I might be receiving you.
Well, I suppose it's, you know, my way of trying to determine whether I should trust you with information or parts of...
I don't expect you immediately to trust. I think this is new and it's going to take time, but I think what I hope you could do is at least talk about what you do feel or what gets in your way of building a trusting relationship.
In building this relationship, who the counselor is as a person is just as important as his or her knowledge and counseling skills. As this trust deepens, so does the process of therapy.
Well, I've had a lot of conflict with my father in particular around my religious beliefs.
Okay.
And that's been very difficult for me.
So that's certainly something we could talk about.
Yeah, it's something that I know I've struggled with inside myself, but I've never spoken about it to anyone before. Mm-hmm. Nervous about what might come out next, what I might say. Maybe that I'd revealed too much.
Mm-hmm. Let's go with that for just a moment. What if you do reveal too much?
Well, I'm afraid I'd be feeling exposed.
Mm-hmm. All therapeutic approaches, regardless of what they are, psychoanalytic, existential, person-centered, reality therapy, behavior therapy, they all have one thing in common. I think they agree that unless there is a working relationship, that therapy will go no place. So let me just comment about what I see happening in this session here between the two of us. What I particularly liked is that Ruth was willing to talk about how she felt with me in this session, that she was aware of feeling vulnerable, as she put it, maybe exposed, that she had revealed too much. And I see that as the foundation to our working relationship. If she can begin to say, I'm afraid I'll reveal too much, and then you'll be thinking thus and so, then we're going to build a trusting relationship. If she does all this silently, I'm not privy to what's going on with her, and I have no way to work with this. Really, all of the theories address the central role that goals have in the counseling process. If we don't help our clients formulate specific and clear goals, then counseling won't be very focused. Yet each theory stresses some different general goals. For example, the feminist therapists tend to stress empowerment and social transformation as goals. And they stress the importance that goals should be collaboratively established, never the therapist defining them for the client. The Adlerians talk about goal alignment, which means the counselor and the client mutually collaborate and talk and agree upon goals for the counseling. The behavior therapists, I think, offer a lot in this area. They help us get very concrete about goals. I find that sometimes clients are very fuzzy and very global in terms of what they want. I just want to feel better, or it's too global. So the behaviorists help break down goals so they're operational. And the existentialists talk about goals for the old self versus the new self, which is kind of broad, but it puts goals in a different framework. Goals can be best defined, I think, with the client and the counselor in collaboration. And it's not enough to define goals at the very outset, the first time you meet a client. But I think every new session, the client and the counselor would be helped by looking at, what do I want for myself during this particular session? So a good question might be, what are you aware of as you're coming into this session today? What is it that you would like to talk about? Or what is it you don't want to talk about, but you think would be helpful if you did? So it's a good focusing for each counseling session to ask the client, how do you want to use this time today?
Dr. Corey and Ruth now work together in establishing therapeutic goals.
I gave you the autobiography that you asked me to write,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just wondering, was it okay?
Oh, I read it. How was it for you, though? I'm not trying to be evasive, but I would really like to know what you thought of it.
Well, it was kind of interesting to write. I hadn't thought much about writing the story of kind of what's gone on in my life. It did bring up a lot of different feelings for me as I was writing.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, a lot of different feelings. Can you mention 2 or 3 different feelings it brought up?
Some disappointment,
Mm-hmm.
some anger.
Mm-hmm.
In therapy, autobiographical and journal writing can help uncover areas of difficulty in a client's life and lead to a more specific set of goals.
I'd like to spend some time in this session talking about specific goals that we're going to be working on as long as we're together. Now, we'll change that. It's not that we have to talk about that today and forever we'll hold you to it. But I think it is important that you think about, what do you want and why are you coming here and how can we best get it? So what were some of the things you came up with?
Well, I made a list. One of the things on the list that I haven't said much about yet is that I'd like to feel better about my appearance, about my looks.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other goals was about my relationship with Jennifer, my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
It's very strained right now since she's become a teenager. And I used to feel really close to her, and now it doesn't feel that way anymore. I'm not sure how to change it, but I like to feel like we're not strangers.
Ruth, a lot of these things I want to come back to. What I'm trying to do now is just kind of lay out a tentative agenda. And I think it really helps you, as much as me, to be thinking about what do you want from these sessions. So there's the thing about school and about other people's approval and about weight and about a different relationship with Jennifer. Any other goals that came up for you?
As specific therapy goals are established, Dr. Corey and Ruth now must prioritize them.
Of that whole list that you just went through, and it may change between now and next week, but are there any things that are on the top of your head that you feel ready to go with? If we had another hour right now and you were to continue, what do you most think you'd want to pick up on?
Perhaps the relationship with my husband.
Mm-hmm.
Clarifying goals will be an ongoing process throughout the course of therapy.
It's not that these goals end here. This is really the beginning. I think every week I'll be asking you to keep thinking and refining and fine-tuning. What is it that you want? And that could include what you want with others. So it's not just what you want selfishly, but what do you want in your life? And how do you want your life to be different? So I don't see that as ending now. But I think sometimes people keep themselves very vague. And so what I've been trying to do is get you to kind of think about how you can make these manageable. I think what I'm really attempting to get at is for Ruth to look at the direction that she's moving toward in her life, and then getting her to make an evaluation of that direction. Is it taking her the place she wants to go? And if she says no, then we can say, okay, what direction would you like to go? And I'm really borrowing that largely from reality therapy, that asks clients to make the evaluation of what they want to change. And also from behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy, the importance of having very clear goals so that we know where we're going. But the most important thing is that these goals should not be ones that I dream up for Ruth, that I think are important, but ones that really come from her. Diversity is a reality, and I think we cannot afford to ignore diversity. And by that I mean differences, maybe between our client and ourselves. And there will always be difference. Your client will be a different age, maybe a different gender, a different socioeconomic background, a different ethnicity, different culture, a different worldview. And I think what's important is that I never assume what difference is salient and what's important. Maybe the difference between us that is important to you is the gender difference. You may be saying, I wonder how this person can understand me because I'm a woman, he's a man, and can he really get in my world? In another case, it may be a difference in our culture or our race. So I think what's important is to always help the client feel the freedom to bring up the differences and to talk about those differences. So I think it could be a little dangerous to assume that what is observable difference will be the one that matters to the client. A concern I have with many of the traditional theories is that some theories don't really make a central place for dealing with diversity. And I really think that these approaches need to be modified to fit the cultural context.
Dealing with diversity can be a challenge for new counselors. Other clinicians share their own perspectives.
I think one of the best ways is kind of like throwing a kid into a cold tub of water to learn how to swim, is to have people exposed to different cultures. And I think in that way you come across your own biases very quickly.
You don't need to be a cultural anthropologist. What's important is, yes, you should know a little bit about the background of the person that you're working with. If you have an opportunity to gain more experience, that's even better, but that's not necessary. As long as you approach the client for who she or he is, and you deal with the client at that level.
Often we have stereotypes of what cultures are like, and I think it's important that as a therapist, if you don't know much about the culture of your client, that you ask them to tell you about it and you learn from them, and I think that really helps them feel proud that they can share with you and educate you about their culture, and it also opens up some insight into why that client is struggling with some issues.
In his work with Ruth, Dr. Corey faces the issue of diversity.
I realized how different you are from me.
And what does that mean to you? True, I am different, probably in a lot of ways, but what differences do you see, and what does that mean to you?
In therapy, cultural and individual differences pose their own challenges. In addition to ethnic and racial differences, there are religious and gender issues and a variety of subcultures that influence a client's thoughts and actions.
But I guess it's about, you know, maybe you being a man and maybe you having a different cultural background, and what I imagine that must have been like, maybe very different from mine, and maybe even your religious background, how hard it is for...
Yeah. Well, I haven't shared the same experiences as you had. You've had a different life, and I would hope that wouldn't stop me from understanding some of your struggles. You know, I think, at least for me, it's important that I respect the differences.
Maybe you're being a man therapist. changed things here, that if I had had a female therapist, maybe it would have been different in some way.
Oh, I don't doubt it. I mean, I think if you'd gone to another male therapist, for example, things would be different. And if you'd gone to a female therapist, things would have been different. I'm not saying better or worse, I'm just saying different.
The acknowledgement and understanding of differences is crucial. If ignored, a therapist may misinterpret a client's culturally unique behavior or limit his or her ability to establish therapeutic rapport.
It would help me to kind of know what I need to understand about you, because I think your world is somewhat different. But I'm wondering if there are things you've talked about in here that somehow you felt I wasn't responsive to or I didn't understand you. And if so, I think you need to let me know ongoingly too. Like, what do I need to know about you that would help me work with you?
Well, maybe you need to know that for a lot of generations, my family just expected that the women would kind of take care of all the family business, and that's very difficult. But it's my responsibility to see that everything runs, that nothing happens unless I make it happen. The meals don't get made, the children don't get disciplined.
And when you've talked about that in the past, because you've talked about that a lot, do you think I haven't been able to understand that?
Well, I wonder. I can't think of anything specific that's led me to believe that you haven't.
How we work with these issues that came up is crucial. And another piece that I think is very important is that I'm open to letting the client teach me about what's important to her in this case, so that I can work with her more effectively. And although I don't have the same worldview, I think I need to at least be sensitive enough to get into her worldview. I may not understand it fully, I won't, but I think I ought to be respectful of the differences and work with them in the therapy process. And to a large extent, I think that all therapy has to be culturally based. There has to be some awareness of how culture operates. So I would see that as very much a part of an integrative model, that in addition to the thinking, the feeling, and the doing, we're always having the cultural themes play out in one way or another. And they can be worked with like any other theme, like transference, countertransference, resistance, here and now issues. Resistance is a part of counseling. And sometimes students will think, oh my gosh, I wish it would go away. And yet, I think the resistance is the very thing that gives us therapeutic material to work with. Behavior therapists don't cop out. They basically say, if there's resistance in a client, it's probably because I didn't make a correct assessment or I'm not using an appropriate technique. The psychoanalytic practitioner will say resistance is to be expected, that there may be a part of us that wants to know ourselves, but the other part is frightened to know ourselves. So resistance is something to be explored. The existentialist would say, hopefully the client will identify the resistance and then challenge the resistance.
Other clinicians offer their own perspectives on the topic of resistance.
In therapy, when people come in, I think they're somewhat frightened and they're somewhat scared. And I think that's the way they ought to be, because they're aware that they're approaching something that is confusing for them. And the anxiety they experience, to me, seems very natural and very much a part of the process. And I think it needs to be respected in people that we work with. And so I feel that resistance kind of has a negative connotation, and I prefer to think of how ready are they to do work. And some clients are ready to work on things in depth, some just want some education, and different people are at different levels of readiness, I think, to really work on their problems.
And I think it's crucial to identify early on what are the goals for the treatment, because if you don't do that, then you might be imposing really elaborate long-term goals on the client that they're not ready to work on or wish to work on, and then that's when you have the resistance.
Resistance is just part of therapy. It seems to me that that's the crux of having skills as a therapist, is being able to deal, to respond to the different varieties of defensiveness or resistance that people have.
And the way that I deal with it is to bring it to the forefront and discuss it openly.
My bias toward resistance is to always be very, very respectful of the client. And therapy is for the client. The therapy is not for the therapist to feel as if they have helped this therapist, the client, over some great hurdle in their life. And it must be that the therapist follows the client and what it is the client is interested in having healed.
As therapy progresses, Dr. Corey finds that Ruth has some resistance.
So how was it when you were thinking of coming here today?
Just like I want to be out of here, like I want to be done. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it's coming from. I feel confused about it. It feels different to be here right now.
Mm-hmm.
Growth and change, even when positive, can involve discomfort. Resistance is a client's conscious or unconscious attempt to maintain the status quo.
You know, if I can't take what we've talked about in here, what I've learned in here, and I can't take it home and have it met with any kind of approval, I figure, you know, what's the use?
Chances are some of the people in your family are not going to like your changes, and they're going to be very hesitant to be supportive. They're going to probably find ways to say, gee, I like the old you much better.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
Well, you said that sometimes things get worse before they get better.
Right.
And they are worse, and I'm not sure they're going to get better.
Okay.
Maybe I can't see down the road where things will be better.
I can't guarantee that either.
But you sound like you're convinced that they will.
Resistance can take many forms. Excessive talking or intellectualizing, silences, or problems with attendance are some examples. The goal is not to eliminate resistance, but to use it as a basis for exploration and learning.
I don't know with certainty. I just know that this is not always an easy process. And people just don't improve week after week. That sometimes they slide back, and sometimes, like you're having a lot of self-doubts. I see that a lot. But I think what's important is you can voice it as you're doing, and we can work with it. I'd like to try something with you in here. You're saying a part of you doesn't want to keep going, and you really had a lot of, it was hard for you to get here today. You wanted to call and cancel even. I'd like you to do some work with that if you're willing.
What did you have in mind?
Well, what I have in mind is just be you. Be the part that wants to kind of cave in. Be the part that wants to quit and not go further, because it's too tough and it's too tiring trying to convince everybody. And I want to be another part. I want to be the part that wants you to continue.
Well, okay.
I noticed you're looking at your watch.
Well, I don't know if we had enough time to do that.
Helping clients understand what's behind their behavior is fundamental. Here, Dr. Corey uses a role-play technique.
Just coming here creates a big problem in my house.
And it wasn't as though I didn't have any problems before, because I had a lot of them, and you know it.
But I would go along with things, so nobody would be on my back about anything. I mean, just go along with,
And I just
go with the flow.
Swallowed it all, internalized it, got sick, beat up on myself. I don't want to do that anymore.
Oh, sometimes I just think it's not going to get any better.
Well, everything might not.
If I went back to the way things were before, then it'd be quiet around my house for change.
Often, what lie beneath resistance are feelings of hopelessness or fear.
You're telling me you'd just as soon be out of here. What do you choose to do?
Well, I'm staying, even though I feel like I would like to leave. I'm staying. I'm here.
You're here. And what's it like to be here right now?
Well, you know, I had thought about calling and canceling the appointment today. I was going to tell you that I was sick. So I didn't want you to, you know, think that I didn't want to come.
It's a hunch, and I'll throw it out and you see if it fits. Is that this is scaring you. It's really scary to have all this flack at home from so many different fronts. And it seems to have temporarily at least gotten the best of you. You just want to give up at this point.
I hadn't realized it, but I guess I am afraid.
Mm-hmm. How about you go home and you write about if I were to quit, and then just write about that. Kind of really let yourself, maybe for one day, kind of imagining quitting, stopping, going back as much as possible to the old you. And then maybe another time, when you sit down and write in your journal, here's why I want to go ahead. Write the other side. And maybe do that throughout the week and see where that takes you. Is that something you're willing to commit to?
No, I could do that. I'll do that.
Therapy sometimes is not a progressive thing where the client just gets better and better, but sometimes clients get stuck, sometimes they go back to an earlier stage, sometimes they wonder if they should go further. It seems like she's really scared in some ways of if I keep going on the way I am, what'll happen then? It's tough enough now. So the homework here is designed to get her to begin to kind of make an existential choice. It won't be easy, so what am I going to do about it? And I attempted that in the session. Like, what do you want to do with your boredom? She says, I'm bored, I'm flat, I don't feel like doing anything, I feel frustrated. Well, she had choices and even what to do with that. So this is sometimes tough for both of us, but I think we've got to hang in there. We can't too quickly say, let's fix it, let's get over this. This may take several sessions. Cognition is certainly one important piece in an integrative approach because we're all thinking beings. We all have ideas and we all have basic beliefs that I think affect how we feel and how we act. So really any integrative approach I think will make room for what are our beliefs, what kind of self-talk do we engage in, and explore those factors. Well, cognitive therapy is a very diverse theoretical approach. There are a lot of different kinds of cognitive and behavioral therapies. Two very big ones are rational motive behavior therapy that was founded by Albert Ellis, and the other is cognitive therapy founded by Aaron Beck. What I like particularly about the rational motive behavioral approach is it's an integrative approach. And Ellis says that our thinking and our feeling and our behaving are always interactive. So how we think affects how we feel and how we behave. What I like especially about rational motive behavior therapy is the ABC model. So C is the consequence. A is an antecedent event, and B is the belief. So let's say you're in a relationship, the person leaves you, and you find yourself very depressed. That would be C, the consequence. Ellis would say that it's not A, the person leaving you, that's causing C, but your belief. So you tell yourself, I must be a worthless person because he or she left. What I like about this approach is it says that thinking is very much instrumental in sometimes how we feel and certainly how we behave. In cognitive behavior therapy, the client must be active if change is to come about. And that means the client is really a partner with the counselor. So in cognitive behavior therapy, the client will be expected to do homework, to be expected to keep track of self-talk, to challenge that self-talk, and to try things in everyday life and record it, and to experiment with behavior. A strength of the cognitive behavioral approach is that it has many cognitive behavioral specific techniques. One of them is Socratic questioning and the Socratic dialogue. So the client will come in and the counselor will ask a lot of questions. Does this help or hinder you? Another is debating your beliefs. Some clients never question their self-talk, the beliefs they hold. And I think these approaches teach clients how to argue with the voice in your head that may hold you back at times. So if you tell yourself, oh gee, I can't make a mistake, you could learn how to argue and say, well wait, where is it written that I can't make a mistake? And how can I ever learn if I'm not willing to try making mistakes? Homework, that's another cognitive behavioral technique. Forces the client to do something outside of the office. if he or she hopes to change.
Learning what techniques to use, when to use them, and with which clients defines integrative counseling. At this point, Dr. Corey chooses a cognitive approach.
And it sounds more like what you're telling yourself, and I'm checking this to see if this fits for you, is that everything I do has to be done outstandingly well. I have to be perfect in really everything. A perfect mother, a perfect student, a perfect wife, a perfect daughter. You didn't say it, but maybe a perfect client. You know, that everything you do, you kind of rate. And I don't know, does that fit?
That does fit.
It does?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's it like? I'd like to get a little bit, stay with that a little bit. What's it like to live under that kind of perfectionism?
It's a lot of pressure, but it's always been that way for me since the time I was small. My mom always said, if you can't do a job well, don't do it at all.
Here they focus on where Ruth picked up her beliefs and how her thinking influences her everyday life. To explore further, Dr. Corey involves her in a role play.
How about you trying to be a part of you that wants to ease up and be maybe kinder to yourself, not be so perfectionistic. But I want to be another side, maybe like a mother side, or the side that you're never quite doing enough. And don't worry if you do it right, okay?
Okay.
Maybe just kind of stay with that part for a while about being a little less critical of yourself and your performances. Like, I'd like to ease up on myself. Start with that.
Okay. I'd like to ease up on myself.
Oh, but Ruth, if you do, you never know where that's going to stop.
Not necessarily. It doesn't mean that I'm going to give up on my goal. It just means I don't have to be so hard on myself.
Yes, but being hard on yourself keeps you in there fighting and doing your best.
Well, yes, it does, but I don't have to be the best at every single thing.
Oh, yes, you do. The best of everything. Super. Super mother, super student, super wife, super friend.
It's the messages I've always heard.
In exploring how her beliefs influence her life, Ruth discovers she has deeper feelings.
I wonder if that wears you down.
It does. Even just listening to you, I feel tired. I'm tired. I'm tired of always having to measure up.
It doesn't surprise me in the least, all these things that you say. That you have such high expectations. They're incredibly high, that if you get even perfect, you're thinking about the next performance, that it's not going to be quite perfect enough. No wonder you're worn down.
Well, I just don't want to do it anymore. I'm just exhausted.
Did you hear what you just said?
I said I don't want to do it anymore. I'm exhausted.
Uh-huh. What's it like to say that? I'm exhausted and I don't want to carry this burden anymore.
Feel some relief, but I don't know how to stop. Sometimes I feel like I just don't know how to stop. Keeping on and going and going and going and doing it. Like I'm in some kind of a whirlwind and I just don't know how to slow down.
Well, what I see a little different now is at least you're talking about that. And you're saying, I don't know how to stop and I want to and I'm exhausted. That's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do you suppose it would be like if you were to say some of these things to some important people in your life? Like some of your kids and your husband, maybe. That I can't do it anymore. Or, I don't want to do all of these things and be everything to everybody.
Guess that's a place to start. It'll be difficult. I just keep it all in, maybe because I'm afraid that if I let some of it out, I'll start feeling about it.
You might. What are you feeling
I
right?
feel like I just did.
What's it like for you? You talked about weights on your shoulder and being burdened. What's it been like to talk about some of that?
Well, it feels a little lighter. Like for the first time I realized what I was doing And I told somebody about it, and I told somebody that I wanted to stop.
Mm-hmm. So that's new.
It's just hard to change.
Yeah, it is. Look at how many years you've been going on this path of trying to do it all perfectly well. What I think was interesting about this session is even though there was an interest in her beliefs and her thinking and her internal standards, that it affected her in other ways as a whole person. It affected her body. She started talking about her tight shoulders. Affected her emotionally. She became a bit sad and the beginnings of some anger. So I think what this demonstrates is we don't work cognitively and emotively and behaviorally separately, that one leads into another and they are integrated. Just as cognition is important, emotion is also important in an integrative perspective. I like to start even with emotion. To me, that's a good place to begin, not to stop, but usually that's the most real place when a client comes in. They usually have some anxiety or they're aware of something in their bodies, and I think it makes more sense to start with what are you experiencing as you sit here right now. That's a route frequently to what we're thinking and even how we're behaving. So I think it's extremely important that we help clients identify what is it that I'm feeling at this moment and what do I want to do with that. Sometimes people say, brief counseling, we can't linger with feelings because we don't have time, so we've got to get right down to the problem and solve it. I'd like to say I think we can't afford not to deal with feelings because I don't think our problems are always in our head or the way we behave. And I think it doesn't have to be long, but I think we do need to address the realm of what is the client feeling. And if we do that, I think the client is more willing to engage in thinking and behavioral changes. What I like about Gestalt therapy very much is that it stresses awareness and contact. Contact between the therapist and the client, and awareness of what are you aware of right now. Some techniques that you can use from the relationship approaches and the experiential approaches would be, one, bringing whatever the client talks into the here and now. So I make it almost a rule. Whenever a client reports, I'll say, can you act as though that were happening right now? Don't talk about it, but somehow bring it into the room. That almost always intensifies what a client is feeling.
In this next session, the focus is on exploring Ruth's emotions.
I have asked John now, it's been several times, to take a walk with me, as we had planned.
Mm-hmm.
And each and every time I've asked him, he's refused, he's found some excuse. He's got something else to do, or there's a football game on TV. I don't know what I am to him. I mean, I just feel like I'm there to cook his dinner, to clean the house, to wash clothes, and I'm not sure that there's anything else going on between us.
Mm-hmm. How is it for you as you're telling me this right now? What are you experiencing?
Well, nothing's changed between him and I, but something's going on for me. I get real sad, I get really depressed, once in a while tearful, cry for a short period of time, and then I make myself stop. And I tell myself that I shouldn't be so weak. And I'm feeling a little frightened about what I'm feeling inside.
Helping clients learn to identify and express their feelings can be a key part of therapy. Dr. Corey has Ruth focus on the here and now experience of her feelings rather than just talking about them.
Could you try something? If I could be John and I won't even say anything, maybe you could borrow my eyes for a while and kind of talk to me about, I'm not in your life. Maybe tell me directly, if I were John sitting here, what is that like for you?
I don't feel like I can say anything to you because you keep telling me that I've changed, and I want to change, and you don't want me to. So every time I say something to you, it's met with your disapproval. I don't know what I am to you anymore. You talk to me about cooking dinner, you talk to me about whether the clothes are clean, whether I've gone to the dry cleaner, and that's about it. So I'm nothing to you. I'm just nothing to you. You don't encourage me in what I want to do with my life. I'm not a person. I'm just, if I meet your needs, then I'm a good wife. And if I don't, then I'm nobody. I feel like I don't exist. Like I'm invisible. Like you really don't see me. And that makes me feel lonely and frightened.
What are you experiencing right now?
I don't know if I could ever say that to him. I'm afraid. I'm just afraid. I'm not sure what of, but I'm afraid that...
Because your voice is different, and your chin was quivering, and your eyes are moist.
As soon as I say I'm afraid he's going to leave, I think to myself that as long as I don't change, he never will. Because he's not unhappy. As long as I make his dinner, as long as I do what I'm supposed to do, he's not unhappy. I'm the one that's unhappy. So what if I keep this changing going on, and I go out for my own walks, and I continue going to school, and I change, then how am I going to be with him? How am I going to stay with him and still be okay? I think that scares me even more.
I think if there's one particular theory I was most drawn to here is more the existential approach, which focuses on don't just report what's going on, but live it in the session. And so you noticed when she wanted to talk about something that happened last week, I asked her again and again, and what are you feeling, what are you experiencing now? And my main aim was to attempt to enter her world more, to get a sense more of what it must be like for her, to give up some of her protection and her self-containment and being all together. And now in her eyes being weaker, more vulnerable, more frightened of what might be the outcomes will be, and will I leave my husband, will he leave me? I saw all that as progress in a way, because now she's able to put words with me to some things that before she wouldn't even allow herself to think about.